Dionysos enters the tapestry of Greek mythology with a story that feels fundamentally different from the polished architectural births of other Olympian gods. For his arrival is not one of celestial decree, but a narrative tangled in secrecy, mortal danger, and the visceral fluidities of transformation. He begins his journey not on the heights of Olympos, but in the mortal city of seven-gated Thebes, a place already haunted by the complexities of its founder, Cadmos, and it is here that we meet the Princess Semele, a woman whose beauty was so profound it drew the wandering eye of Zeus himself. Semele was the daughter of King Cadmos and the sister to a trio of women, Ino, Autonoe, and Agave, who would all eventually be caught in the wreckage of Dionysos' wake. But at the start, she is merely a girl caught in the orbit of a god. Her life changes the very moment Zeus notices her, yet the king of the gods, perhaps weary of the wreckage his true form leaves behind, visits her in the guise of a handsome, charismatic mortal, and Semele falls for him with a desperate human sincerity, never suspecting that the man in her bed holds the lightning of the cosmos in his palm. The passion between them unfolds in the quiet, humid shadows of the palace, hidden from the judgmental eyes of her family, and certainly hidden from the terrifying vigilance of Hera. Or so Semele believes in her temporary paradise. However, nothing stays hidden from the Queen of Heaven for long, as Hera senses infidelity, the way a winter storm senses a drop in pressure. She does not merely discover the affair, she breathes it in, her anger burning not with the quick heat of a flame, but with the cold, geological patience of a glacier. Hera prefers the kind of revenge that is slow and psychological, a manipulation that allows the victim to become the architect of their own ruin, and so she descends to Thebes, shedding her divinity to take the form of Bero, Semele's elderly nurse, a woman who had held the princess since she was an infant, and whose voice carried the weight of absolute trust in this disguise. Hera approaches Semele with a feigned warmth, acting as a sympathetic confidante to a young woman bursting with the secret of her divine lover. As Semele speaks freely of the mysterious man who visits her night after night, Hera listens with a practiced grandmotherly nod, and then, with the precision of a surgeon, she plants the seed of doubt. She whispers that in an age of deception, many men claim to be gods to lure virtuous women into their beds, and she asks Semele how she can truly be sure that this lover is the king of Olympos and not some silver-tongued charlatan. Hera suggests that if Semele is indeed loved by the greatest of the immortals, then she deserves to be treated with the same reverence shown to the queen of the gods herself. She deserves to see Zeus in his true, unmasked glory, the same radiance he reveals only in the privacy of his marriage bed on Olympos. Hera wraps this poison in a tone of protective sisterhood, convincing the princess that demanding the truth is the only way to secure her honor and prove her lover's worth. By the time Hera vanishes back into the clouds, the seed has taken root in Semele's heart, turning her joy into a restless, gnawing hunger for validation. When Zeus next arrives, shrouded in his mortal mask, Semele greets him with a calculated coldness, refusing his touch until he grants her a single unnamed favor. Zeus, confident in his power and blinded by his affection for her, swears an unbreakable oath by the river Styx, the most terrifying and binding contract in the universe, that he will grant whatever she desires. The moment the words are spoken, the air in the room seems to thicken with the weight of destiny, and Semele reveals her request. She demands to see him as he truly is, in the full, terrifying majesty of his godhood. Zeus is instantly struck with a cosmic horror, for he knows that the mortal frame is a vessel of clay and cannot contain the high-voltage reality of the divine, yet the oath of the Styx binds him with iron necessity. A promise forced from a god is still a law of the universe. He pleads with her, his voice trembling with a genuine desire to save her, warning her that her eyes cannot bear the sight and her flesh cannot endure the heat. But Semele, driven by Hera's lingering whispers, repeats her demand with the stubbornness of the doomed. Zeus, with a heavy heart, peels back the layers of his mortal disguise and reveals himself in his full, unmitigated glory, the thunder, the blinding white light, and the raw, electrical power that fuels the stars. The mortal world simply cannot bear the weight of such a presence. Semele is not merely killed, she is consumed, engulfed in a divine fire that reduces her home to ash and her body to a memory in a single, agonizing instant. Amidst the smoke and the devastation of the palace, however, a miracle stirs within the embers, for the unborn child, though only 6 months along, survives the cataclysm that killed his mother. Zeus, in a rare act of desperate paternal instinct, reaches into the flames and gathers the small, still-forming Dionysos to protect the child and allow him to finish the journey toward birth. Zeus makes an incision in his own thigh, sewing the infant into his divine flesh and securing the wound with golden clasps. This second gestation, known to the ancients as the thigh birth, is the reason Dionysos is forever hailed as Demeter, the twice-born. It transforms the child into a being of radical duality, a figure shaped by human tragedy and divine intervention, belonging neither to the world of men nor fully to the world of gods. When the months have passed and the golden clasps are finally undone, Dionysos is born again from the body of his father, and Zeus, perhaps sensing the chaotic power the boy will one day wield, crowns the infant with wreaths of serpents, creatures that shed their skins and represent the eternal cycle of life, death, and the dark, fertile power of the earth. But the danger is far from over, for Hera's memory is as eternal as her life, and she will never allow the living proof of Zeus's infidelity to draw breath in peace. Knowing that the infant is a target for the queen's wrath, Zeus summons Hermes, the swiftest and most cunning of the gods, whose specialty lies in the shadows of deception. Hermes carries the baby Dionysos through the secret mountain paths to the house of Ino, Semele's sister, and her husband Athamas, the king of Orchomenus. There Zeus devises a plan of radical disguise. Dionysos is to be raised as a girl, dressed in saffron robes, and taught the manners of the feminine quarters, in the hopes that Hera will overlook a young princess, while she searches for a prince. For a few years this domestic charade holds, and the boy grows in the quiet safety of the nursery. But Hera's suspicion is a hound that never loses the scent. When she finally discovers the deception, her fury does not strike the child directly, perhaps fearing Zeus's intervention, but instead falls upon the mortals who dared to hide him. She infects Ino and Athamas with a virulent, hallucinatory madness that turns their home into a house of horrors. Athamas, suddenly convinced that his eldest son, Lerchos, is a wild deer, stalks the boy through the halls of the palace and slays him with a hunting spear. Convinced he is providing a trophy for the table, Ino, in the throes of her own shattered mind, seizes her younger son, Melicertes, and in a moment of terrifying confusion, plunges him into a cauldron of boiling water before gathering his body and leaping from a high cliff into the churning sea. In an act of divine mercy that echoes through later cults, Zeus transforms the dying Ino into the sea goddess Leucothea, the white goddess of the foam, and Melicertes into the spirit Palemon. But their mortal lives are ended by the very shadow Dionysos cast upon them. In the midst of this domestic apocalypse, Zeus acts once more to save his son, transforming the toddler Dionysos into a tiny frisky goat to mask his scent from Hera's vengeful nostrils. He once again commands Hermes to whisk the animal god away, this time far from the civilizations of men to the mystical and fog-shrouded Mount Nysa. Here, the child is entrusted to the Nymphae, the spirits of the deep forests and hidden springs, and it is in this wild, uncurated sanctuary that Dionysos truly finds his nature. Under the care of the nymphs and under the tutelage of the wise, drunken satyr Silenus, who becomes his foster father and mentor, Dionysos grows up in a world of tangled vines, cold mountain water, and the uninhibited rhythms of the wild. It is on the slopes of Nysa that he first discovers the secret of the grapevine, learning how to cultivate the plant, how to ferment its fruit, and how to harness the liquid fire that results from its decay. Wine, in Dionysos' hands, becomes more than a mere beverage. It is a tool of alchemy, a symbol of the twice-born nature of the god himself, requiring the crushing of the fruit to release the spirit within. He learns that intoxication is a form of temporary godhood, a release from the rigid boundaries of the ego and the laws of the city, and he begins to gather a following of satyrs and wild women who find in his new religion a freedom they never knew existed. However, even this remote paradise cannot shield him forever, and as Dionysos reaches the threshold of adulthood, Hera finally strikes him with the same weapon she used on his aunt, madness. This divine insanity is not a static condition, but a wandering nomadic fog that pulls him away from Nysa and drives him out into the wider world, a god without a home, searching for a peace he cannot define. He roams across the rugged landscapes of Thesprotia, his mind a storm of disjointed memories and divine static, until he hears of the ancient oracle of Zeus at Dodona, where the great oaks of the forest whisper the will of his father through the rustling of their leaves. Dionysos becomes obsessed with the idea that if he can only reach the center of the grove and hear his father's voice, the madness will lift and he will finally be whole. The journey is a grueling test of his endurance, and at the height of his fevered wandering, he arrives at the edge of a vast, treacherous swamp that seems to stretch into eternity, its waters thick with mud and hidden dangers that he, in his weakened state, cannot hope to swim. As he stands at the water's edge, he encounters two humble donkeys grazing in the reeds. In his desperation, he captures one of them, and in a scene that would be immortalized in later art, the young god rides the lowly beast across the expanse of the swamp, his feet staying dry as the animal navigates the treacherous terrain with a quiet, steady persistence. This moment is crucial to the character of Dionysos, for it reinforces that he is not a god of the golden chariot or the high-stepping stallion. He is the god of the common beast, the marginalized animal, and the humble path. He finally reaches the sacred oaks of Dodona, and there the miracle occurs. Zeus speaks through the wind, and the sound of his father's voice acts as a psychic anchor, drawing Dionysos back from the brink of insanity and restoring his mind to its full divine clarity, in gratitude for the animal that carried him through the mire when he could not carry himself. Dionysos honors the donkeys by placing them among the stars as the constellation Aceli, two faint but eternal lights that remind the heavens of their service to the wandering god. With his sanity restored, Dionysos does not return to Olympos to sit quietly at the table of the gods. Instead, he begins a massive, world-altering expedition to spread the gift of the vine and the mystery of his cult. Some traditions say he traveled south into Egypt, where he was welcomed by King Proteus, and there he exchanged the wisdom of the vine for the ancient secrets of Egyptian ritual and botanical magic, blending his identity with the older, darker myths of the Nile. From there, he turned his eyes toward the east, leading a vast, ecstatic army of maenads and satyrs across the known world, through the plains of Mesopotamia and into the heart of India. This was not a conquest of swords, but a conquest of the spirit. He brought the thyrsos, his pine-cone-tipped staff, and the drum, teaching the art of winemaking and the power of the festival to people who had lived in the gray shadow of labor. Along the way, he encountered those who resisted him, like King Lycurgus of Thrace, who tried to banish the god and was subsequently driven to hack off his own limbs in a fit of Dionysian madness, or the Tyrrhenian pirates who attempted to kidnap the god for ransom, only to find their oars turning into snakes and their ship sprouting ivy, until in a panic, they leaped into the sea and were transformed into dolphins. These stories serve as a warning: to welcome Dionysos is to welcome joy, but to reject him is to invite the total collapse of the self. By the time he finally turns back toward Greece, Dionysos is no longer the hidden child or the wandering madman. He is a force of nature, a god who has mastered the boundaries between life and death, male and female civilization and the wild. He eventually returns to Thebes to confront the family that failed his mother, and in a final act of filial piety, he descends into the underworld itself, entering the house of Hades through the Alcyonian lake. To retrieve Semele, he brings her back from the dead and elevates her to Olympos under the name Thyone, ensuring that the mother who died in fire would live forever in light. His identity remains permanently shaped by the extremes of his origin: the desire of Zeus, the deception of Hera, the tragedy of the nursery, and the wild green education of the nymphs. Dionysos stands as the eternal outsider of the Olympian group, the god who arrived twice, grew twice, and crossed every boundary the world tried to set before him. He is the reminder that divinity is not always born from purity and order. Sometimes it is forged in the furnace of madness and wandering, and it becomes all the more powerful for having survived the fire. As a god, he offers the world a double-edged gift: the release from pain and the celebration of life, but also the terrifying reminder that beneath the surface of our controlled lives, there is always a wild, divine frenzy waiting to be unleashed.